I've always been skeptical about ghost stories. Growing up, I loved horror movies, but the supernatural? Never bought it. That all changed in my junior year of high school. My school was old, built in the 1930s, and every floor creaked like it had secrets. Most classrooms were above ground, but there was one exception. A basement classroom they only used when there was no space upstairs. It was room 009. The stairwell leading to it was steep and narrow, and the basement smelled like mildew and old books. Teachers avoided it, and so did students. The running joke was that room 009 was where they put troublemakers. One week, our school's power grid was being repaired, and a handful of us were told to take history class in the basement for a few days. Our teacher, Mr. Hollis, looked irritated the entire walk down. "It's just for this week," he muttered, leading us single file. The moment we entered, I felt it. Heavy air, like the walls were pressing closer. The room was cold, even though it was late spring. There were no windows, just dim fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. The class went on as usual that first day, but I couldn't focus. The lights flickered a few times, and I kept hearing noises, soft thuds, a shuffle, like someone moving in the walls. I thought it was just me until I caught Ava, the girl next to me, flinching every time it happened. "You hear that?" I whispered as Mr. Hollis lectured about the Civil War. She nodded, wide-eyed. "Yeah, it's weird, right?" At lunch, a few of us talked about it, and someone mentioned a rumor. Supposedly, decades ago, a janitor went missing in the basement, never to be found. Another version of the story claimed a student disappeared in room 009 itself. I rolled my eyes. "Typical school legends," I said, trying to sound confident. But the next day, things got stranger. We were halfway through the lesson when one of the fluorescent lights sputtered out with a loud pop. "Mr. Hollis groaned and kept teaching, but Ava muttered, 'Something's wrong.' I turned to her, but she was staring at the back corner of the room. There was a supply closet back there. Its door was cracked open slightly, though I could have sworn it was shut before class. I followed her gaze, and my stomach dropped. A figure was standing just inside the closet. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of a person, thin, tall, unmoving. I blinked, but it was still there. "Mr. Hollis?" I said, my voice cracking. "There's someone in the closet." The whole class turned to look. Mr. Hollis frowned and glanced over his shoulder. The closet door was closed now. "There's no one there," he snapped. "Pay attention." The rest of the day dragged on, but I felt paranoid, like someone was watching me. When the final bell rang, I grabbed my things and bolted. Ava caught up with me outside the stairwell, pale and shaky. "You saw it too, right? In the closet?" I nodded, chills running down my spine. "Yeah." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying what I'd seen, that figure in the dark. I convinced myself I was imagining things, that maybe the flickering lights had tricked my eyes. But then came the final day. The morning felt off. When we got to room 009, the lights were dimmer than before, like they were struggling to stay on. Ava refused to sit near the closet and switched seats with someone else. Mr. Hollis seemed agitated. His words rushed as if he wanted to get through the lesson and leave. That's when we heard it, a dragging noise. It came from the supply closet, loud enough that the whole class froze. "What the hell was that?" someone whispered. Mr. Hollis slammed his textbook shut. "Enough of this nonsense. Quiet." But before he could say more, the closet door creaked open. Slowly, deliberately. I felt my chest tighten. There was no wind, no one near it. And standing inside, barely visible in the shadows, was the figure again. It stepped forward. A girl screamed. The thing, it looked human, but not quite. It was off, like its limbs were too long. Its movements jerky, unnatural. Mr. Hollis froze, his face white as paper. The figure tilted its head toward him, and I swear it smiled. Then, the lights went out. We screamed. Someone shoved me in the chaos and I fell, hitting my knee hard. I couldn't see, but I felt the figure close, like its icy breath was near my face. The light snapped back on a moment later, and the room was empty except for us. Mr. Hollis didn't finish the lesson. He told us all to leave. By the end of the day, the basement was locked, and no one ever mentioned room 009 again. Not teachers, not students. Ava and I tried to find out what happened, but the school's records didn't mention the basement or even the classroom. It was as if room 009 had never existed. To this day, I don't know what we saw, but every so often, I dream about it, standing just inside the closet, watching, waiting, and I wake up to the faint sound of something dragging on the floor. This happened in middle school, and I swear I still can't explain it. Our bathrooms were always gross, peeling paint, flickering lights, the works. There was one particular girl's bathroom on the second floor that everyone hated. It wasn't haunted exactly, but something about it felt wrong. I never really thought much of it until I ended up there alone after school. It started when my friend Sarah dared me to use the bathroom by myself. "What's the big deal?" I scoffed. She just smirked. "Try going into the third stall." "Why?" I asked. "Just do it. You'll see." I rolled my eyes, thinking it was some middle school prank. But the way she said it, her tone was off, like she didn't want to talk about it anymore. The bathroom had 5 stalls. I never noticed anything weird before, but looking back, the third stall did always seem darker. It wasn't locked or broken. It just had this grimy feeling to it, like no one ever wanted to clean it. I decided to prove Sarah wrong. So after school one day, when most of the kids had gone home, I went in alone. The hallway was empty, quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Inside the bathroom, everything seemed normal at first. I stood in front of the third stall, staring at its scratched-up door. For some reason, my heart was racing. It was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. Nothing, just a gross toilet and graffiti-covered walls. I let out a breath and laughed at myself. "Nice try, Sarah," I muttered, turning to leave. That's when I heard it. A soft, muffled tap-tap-tap. It came from the third stall. I froze, my hand on the door handle. Slowly, I turned back. The stall door was closed now. I could have sworn I left it open. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding tiny in the empty bathroom. No answer, but the tapping continued, soft, steady, deliberate. I took a step toward the stall, my stomach twisting into knots. "Who's in there?" My voice cracked. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the door of the third stall slammed open so hard it hit the wall. I screamed and ran out of the bathroom, not stopping until I made it to the front doors of the school. My backpack was still inside, but I didn't care. I just ran home, my heart pounding in my ears. The next day, I told Sarah what happened. Her face went pale. "I told you," she said quietly. "You shouldn't have gone in there." I begged Sarah to tell me why the third stall freaked everyone out, but she wouldn't say anything at first. Finally, she caved. "There's this story," she began, her voice low. "Years ago, before we were here, a girl got locked in the third stall. She was stuck for hours because no one could hear her screaming. When they finally found her, she'd passed out. She was fine, but ever since then, weird stuff happens in there." "That's it?" I asked. Sarah hesitated. "Well, some people say she never really left. Like part of her stayed there, or maybe something else came instead. Kids hear tapping, whispers, stuff like that." I didn't believe her at first. It sounded too much like a campfire story. But after what I'd seen, I wasn't so sure. Things got weirder after that. Every time I passed the bathroom, I'd glance inside, and the third stall door was always cracked open, like it was waiting. I started hearing the tapping in other places too. I'd be sitting in class, and I'd swear I heard it faintly, tap, 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 coming from nowhere. One day after school, I had to go back inside because I'd forgotten my math textbook. I didn't want to go alone, but Sarah wasn't around. So I hurried in, repeating to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. The halls were silent again. I grabbed my textbook from my locker and was heading out when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint, but unmistakable. I turned toward the bathroom. The door was wide open, and from where I stood, I could see the third stall door was shut tight. I felt my throat go dry. Against all common sense, I walked toward the bathroom. My body felt heavy, like I was being pulled forward. I didn't want to go, but my legs kept moving. The tapping got louder as I stepped inside. It was definitely coming from the third stall. My heart pounded as I approached. "Hello?" I whispered. The tapping stopped. Then, from behind the door, a voice whispered, "Help me." I stumbled back so fast I nearly fell. My brain screamed at me to run, but I couldn't look away. The door creaked open, slowly this time, and I saw a pair of feet. Small, dirty, bare feet standing just inside the stall. I ran. I didn't stop running until I got home. My mom thought I was crazy when I burst through the door, out of breath and shaking. After that, I refused to go near that bathroom again. Other girls said they saw things too. Shadows in the mirrors, whispers in the stalls, and always the faint sound of tapping. A few weeks later, the bathroom was closed for repairs. The third stall was replaced entirely, and after that, nothing strange happened. At least, not that I heard about. I don't know what I saw or heard that day. Maybe it was a ghost. Maybe it was something worse. All I know is I'll never forget that voice whispering, "Help me," from behind the third stall door. It's funny how some memories refuse to fade. This happened when I was in 8th grade, and to this day, I can't explain it. No one can. Our regular science teacher, Mrs. Linden, was out for a week after breaking her leg, so we got a substitute. I can't remember her real name. We just called her Ms. V. She was weird, like off. She was pale, her skin almost gray, with dull, stringy black hair that hung around her face. She never smiled, and her eyes, they were too dark, like black marbles. The first time she walked in, the room went quiet. She stood at the front, looking us over, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but monotone, like a robot. "Open your textbooks to Chapter 5. Photosynthesis." The class went on, but something about her made everyone uneasy. She never blinked. At least, I didn't see her do it. She'd stand there, watching us with those black eyes, and I swear the air in the room felt colder when she was around. On the second day, we noticed something strange. Ms. V didn't seem to understand the lesson she was teaching. She would stare at the textbook like she was seeing it for the first time. And when kids asked questions, her answers made no sense. "Ms. V, how do chloroplasts help plants grow?" "Chloroplasts," she said, her voice flat, "absorb life. The energy is transferred into survival." That didn't sound right, and the kid who asked, Andy, looked confused. "But isn't it sunlight?" Ms. V turned her head toward him, so slowly it gave me chills. "Energy comes from many sources, Andrew. Sunlight is just one." The class got quiet. I saw Andy shiver in his seat. I don't know why, but I felt like Ms. V knew things about us, things she shouldn't. On Thursday, things got worse. Andy didn't show up to class. No one knew why. That wasn't too weird. Kids got sick all the time. But what was weird was how Ms. V reacted. When she walked in, she scanned the room with those unblinking eyes and said, "Where's Andrew?" We all stared at her. Teachers didn't usually care when someone was absent, but Ms. V's tone sounded almost expectant. No one answered her. She nodded, like she already knew. "Missing energy," she whispered. We tried to ignore it, but the atmosphere felt heavy. The lights flickered more than usual, and the air in the classroom felt thick. I was sweating even though the windows were cracked open. During the lesson, I swear I saw her eyes glow faintly, just for a second. When she looked at me, I dropped my pen and bent down to pick it up, but when I looked up, she was standing right next to my desk. I hadn't even heard her move. "You dropped something," she said softly. Her face was too close to mine. Her breath smelled like something rotting. Thanks," I muttered, forcing myself to look away. That night, I had a nightmare. I was in the classroom alone, and Ms. V was standing at the front, staring at me. Her mouth opened, but her voice came from everywhere. Energy must be replaced. I woke up sweating, the sound of her voice echoing in my ears. The next day, Friday, Andy still wasn't back, and another kid, Maria, was absent too. Ms. V walked into the room and said the same thing. "Where is Maria?" No one spoke. By this point, we were all on edge. Kids whispered about Ms. V in the halls, saying she wasn't human, that she was something else. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no denying she was wrong. Halfway through class, something happened that I still can't forget. The lights flickered and went out for a second. It was only a moment, but when the lights came back on, Ms. V was gone. Her chair sat empty, and we all sat frozen, staring at each other. "Where'd she go?" someone whispered. We heard it then, a soft, faint sound, like scraping, coming from the supply closet at the back of the room. We all turned, and the door creaked open. It was dark inside, but I swear I saw a shadow move. Ms. V stepped out of the closet. Her clothes were wrinkled, and her hair hung messily in her face, but her eyes, her awful, black eyes, looked sharper than before. She smiled for the first time. "Energy replaced," she whispered. The bell rang, and we bolted. I grabbed my things and didn't look back. That was the last time I ever saw her. On Monday, Mrs. Linden was back, hobbling around on crutches like nothing had happened. We asked her about Ms. V, but she just looked confused. "I didn't leave a substitute named Ms. V," she said. We checked with the office, but there were no records of a substitute that week. Andy and Maria came back to school eventually, but both of them were different, quieter, like something had been taken from them. To this day, I don't know who or what Ms. V was, but sometimes, when I'm alone and it's too quiet, I swear I hear a whisper in my ear, "Energy must be replaced."